When self-made tech billionaire Elliot Harrington sent his entitled son Blake to work on his brother's struggling family farm in eastern Washington, he thought he was finally teaching his son a lesson about responsibility and consequences. What he didn't expect was how this summer of hard work would transform not just his rebellious son, but heal wounds in the Harrington family that had festered for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how 3 months of physical labor, no internet, and the wisdom of rural life accomplished what years of private schools, therapists, and threatened consequences never could, turning a spoiled heir into a man of substance and purpose. For 23 years, Blake Harrington had lived in a world where money solved every problem. At Silver Lake Farm, he would discover that some of life's most valuable lessons can't be purchased at any price. Every transformation begins with a journey. But before we witness Blake's arrival at Silver Lake Farm, we need to understand what brought father and son to this breaking point. Elliot Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, the Seattle. Skylines spread before him like a kingdom. At 56, he had built Harrington Technologies from a basement startup into a multinational corporation valued at over $30 billion. His algorithms had revolutionized artificial intelligence in medical diagnostics, saving countless lives and making him one of the wealthiest men in America. But at this moment, none of that success provided any comfort as he stared at the message. On his phone, a familiar sense of disappointment washing over him. Can't make the foundation presentation. Something better came up. Have Thompson handle it. Not again, Elliot muttered. This wasn't merely another missed meeting. The Harrington Medical Access Foundation was launching a groundbreaking initiative to bring cutting-edge diagnostics to underserved communities globally, a project Elliot had personally tasked his son with overseeing 6 months ago. Today's presentation to international health ministers represented years of planning and millions in investment. The photo on his desk showed a much younger Elliot with a small boy on his shoulders, both smiling against the backdrop of a modest farmhouse. That little boy had once looked at his father with admiration, eager to follow in his footsteps. What had happened to that child? Blake Harrington had grown up with every advantage: the finest private schools, summer programs at prestigious universities, introductions to world leaders and innovative thinkers. Yet somehow, all this opportunity had produced a young man who treated life as an endless party, responsibilities as optional inconveniences, and his father's hard-earned fortune as his personal entertainment fund. "Your mother would be so disappointed," Elliot whispered to the photo. Morgan Harrington had passed away when Blake was just 12, a loss that shattered their family. In his grief, Elliot had buried himself in work, while trying to compensate for his emotional absence by indulging Blake's every material desire. When Blake wanted a sports car for his 16th birthday, Elliot bought him a limited edition Ferrari. When he crashed it 3 months later, Elliot replaced it with an even more expensive model. When Blake dropped out of Stanford after 2 semesters, claiming it wasn't challenging him, Elliot created a vice president position for him at the foundation, a role Blake rarely bothered to fulfill. "Mr. Harrington, the board and the health ministers are assembled in the conference room," his assistant said from the doorway. "I'll be right there, Sophia," Elliot replied, straightening his tie. As he made his way to the meeting, Elliot tried to focus on the presentation ahead. The MedAccess initiative would provide life-saving diagnostic technology to regions where basic medical care was still a luxury. It was the culmination of his life's work, merging technological innovation with humanitarian impact. "Ah, Elliot," the board chairman said, rising as Elliot entered the impressive boardroom filled with executives and distinguished international visitors. "We were just discussing the demonstration portion. I believe Blake was scheduled to present the community implementation strategy. Blake sends his regrets. He's handling an urgent matter elsewhere. Dr. Thompson will cover that segment of the presentation." Elliot replied smoothly, noticing the subtle reactions from other board members. This wasn't the first time Blake had failed to appear. Elliot noticed a health minister whispering to an aide, the atmosphere in the room cooling slightly. The meeting proceeded professionally, but Elliot could sense the undercurrent of disappointment. Trust was currency in both business and philanthropy, and Blake's repeated absences were depleting that account rapidly. After the presentation, Elliot retreated to his office and closed the door. He pulled out his tablet, and a quick search brought up Blake's Instagram feed, updated minutes ago. There was Blake on a private yacht in the Mediterranean, champagne in hand, surrounded by models and celebrity friends. The caption read, "Why work when you can play? Lee's billionaire lifestyle." Sorry, not sorry. The timestamp showed it was posted during the exact time of the foundation presentation. Something in Elliot finally snapped. This wasn't just about a missed meeting or an embarrassing social media post. His son was undermining everything he had built, not just the company or the foundation, but the values that had guided Elliot from his humble beginnings to his current success. His phone rang. It was his PR director calling. "Elliot, we need to discuss damage control. 2 major funding partners saw Blake's posts. They're questioning our commitment to the initiative." By the time Elliot left the office that evening, the foundation's reputation had suffered a measurable blow. Potential partnerships were now in jeopardy, all because his son couldn't be bothered to show up for a 2-hour presentation about work that could save millions of lives. As his driver navigated through evening traffic toward his waterfront penthouse, Elliot made a decision. This pattern couldn't continue. Something had to change, dramatically and immediately. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then dialed the one person who might understand, the one connection to his past life that remained. "Oliver, it's Elliot. I need a favor, a big one." "Well, this is unexpected." His older brother's voice was warm, despite the obvious years of distance. "Everything all right?" "No. It's Blake. I've tried everything and nothing's working. I think he needs what we had growing up. You want to send him to the farm?" Oliver's weathered voice showed understanding dawning. "Yes. For the summer, no phone, no internet, no credit cards, just honest work from sunrise to sunset." Oliver chuckled softly. "Took you long enough to remember where you came from, little brother." Elliot looked determined as the city lights faded behind him. He had no idea how that single phone call would set in motion a transformation that would reshape not just his son's life, but his own understanding of what truly matters. The Harrington penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of Seattle's most exclusive residential tower. With its minimalist design, museum-quality art collection, and panoramic views of Puget Sound, it epitomized the pinnacle of urban luxury, a fitting showcase for one of the tech world's most successful innovators. But as Elliot entered that evening, the space felt hollow. The Italian marble floors echoed under his footsteps. The carefully curated lighting highlighted empty spaces where family should be. Music thumped from upstairs, Blake's private floor. Elliot had installed a state-of-the-art sound system for his son's 21st birthday, a decision he now regretted as bass vibrated through the ceiling. He set down his briefcase and made his way upstairs. Blake's domain occupied the entire top floor, a space larger than most family homes. The door to his media room was ajar, voices and laughter spilling out alongside the music. Without knocking, Elliot pushed it open. The scene before him confirmed his worst fears. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Blake reclined on a custom leather sofa, surrounded by a half-dozen friends Elliot had never seen before. Empty champagne bottles littered the coffee table alongside remnants of what appeared to be an expensive sushi delivery. On the massive screen, a paused video game displayed a high score under Blake's gamertag, Dad. Blake's feigned enthusiasm barely masked his annoyance at the interruption. Guys, this is my father, the famous Elliot Harrington. A few mumbled. Greetings followed, none making eye contact. At 23, Blake had his mother's striking features, dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. But where Morgan's eyes had held warmth and depth, Blake's were glazed with privilege and disinterest. "Blake, we need to talk," Elliot said, his voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. "Kind of in the middle of something here, Dad." Blake gestured vaguely at his friends. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I've got plans later." "No, it cannot. Wait. Now." Something in Elliot's tone must have registered. Blake sighed dramatically, setting down his crystal tumbler of what was almost certainly not his first drink of the evening. "Fine, whatever." He turned to his entourage. "Make yourselves comfortable. This won't take long." In Elliot's home office, the tension was palpable. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle sparkled below them, a city of opportunity that Blake had never appreciated. "The international health ministers," Elliot began. "You were supposed to present today." Blake shrugged, examining his manicured nails. "I sent you a text. Something came up." "Yes, I saw what came up. The entire board saw what came up, thanks to your Instagram post. Yachting in the Mediterranean with influences while we're trying to secure partnerships worth millions for medical programs in developing countries." "It wasn't like that," Blake protested weakly. "Cassandra's father invited us last minute. He's the CEO of—" "I know who Victor Matthews is," Elliot cut him off. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Dad? That I didn't sit through another boring meeting where everyone just wants to kiss your ass because of your money?" Elliot felt a flash of real fury. "The point is responsibility, Blake. Commitment. Following through on your word. Those boring meetings are about providing medical diagnostics to people who currently have no access to healthcare. And they'll still get them whether I'm at the meeting or not," Blake countered. "The foundation has hundreds of employees. Why does it matter if I'm there?" "Because you're the vice president of community implementation, a position I created specifically for you after you dropped out of Stanford. A position that comes with real responsibilities, which you consistently ignore." Blake rolled his eyes. "We both know that position is just for show. You wanted me involved in the company, so you created a fancy title that looks good in press releases." The worst part was, Blake wasn't entirely wrong. Elliot had created the position hoping his son would grow into it, rather than demanding he earn it. "Do you have any idea," Elliot said quietly, "how much damage your absence caused today? 2 major funding partners are reconsidering their commitments." For a brief moment, Blake looked genuinely surprised. "Because I missed one meeting?" "Because they saw your Instagram post mocking the very concept of work and responsibility while they were in our boardroom discussing millions in charitable contributions." Blake had the decency to look slightly abashed. "I'll delete the post." "That's not enough anymore, Blake." Elliot moved to the window, gathering his thoughts. "This pattern has to stop. You've had every advantage, every opportunity, and you're squandering it all." "Oh, here we go." Blake's defensive posture returned. "Another lecture about how you built your empire from nothing, while I've had everything handed to me. When I was your age," Elliot said, ignoring the interruption, "I was working 16-hour days, living on ramen noodles in a studio apartment, and putting every cent back into my startup. Different times, Dad. The tech industry isn't like that anymore. This isn't about the tech industry. It's about character. Blake's phone chimed with a notification. He automatically reached for it, but Elliot was faster. "Hey!" Blake protested. As his father confiscated the device, Elliot glanced at the screen, a message from someone named Skylar asking if they were still on for Vegas tonight. "Vegas?" Elliot asked incredulously. "You were planning to fly to Vegas tonight after missing a crucial presentation today?" "It's Skylar's birthday," Blake said, as if that explained everything. Elliot set the phone down on his desk, his decision crystallizing. "Pack a bag." "What?" Blake looked genuinely confused. "Pack a bag," Elliot repeated. "Clothes for a month. Practical things, jeans, t-shirts, work boots if you have them, though I doubt it." Blake laughed, the sound hollow and uncertain. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Does it look like I'm joking?" Elliot's expression was stone. "You're leaving tomorrow morning. For where? Rehab? A meditation retreat?" Blake's sarcasm couldn't mask his growing concern. "I don't have a problem, Dad. I'm just living my life." "You're going to Washington." D.C. "For what?" "Not D.C., Eastern Washington, Silver Lake Farm, where I grew up." Blake stared at his father as if he'd lost his mind. "The family farm, with Uncle Oliver. Why would I go there?" "1 month," Elliot said firmly. "No phone, no internet except for emergencies, no credit cards, just honest work from sunrise to sunset." Realization dawned on Blake's face, followed by disbelief and then outrage. "You can't be serious. I'm 23 years old, not some teenager you can ground." "Then act like it," Elliot challenged. "Adults keep their commitments. Adults understand that privileges come with responsibilities." "This is insane," Blake sputtered. "I'm not going to some backwater farm in the middle of nowhere. You can't make me." "You're right," Elliot conceded. "I can't force you. You have a choice. 1 month at the farm, or you're completely cut off. Not just your credit cards or allowance, everything. The penthouse, the cars, your trust fund that matures next year, all of it." Blake's face paled. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." Elliot's expression was implacable. "I built everything I have from nothing. I won't watch you throw away your potential because you've never had to work for anything in your life." The silence stretched taut between them, like a wire about to snap. Blake's expression cycled through shock, anger, calculation, and finally a grudging recognition of defeat. "Fine," he spat finally. 1 month on your precious farm, and then you'll see what a massive mistake this is." As Blake stormed out, slamming the office door behind him, Elliot sank into his chair. He wondered if he was doing the right thing, or if he was about to make everything worse. But one thought kept circling in his mind. Something had to change, and sometimes the only way forward was through discomfort. Little did he know just how much discomfort and transformation awaited both of them in the month to come. After Blake stormed off, Elliot remained in his office, nursing a glass of single malt scotch as he watched the city lights shimmer across the water. His thoughts drifted back to Silver Lake Farm, a place he hadn't visited in over 15 years. The Harrington family farm sat on 200 acres of rolling hills in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains. For 3 generations, it had produced wheat, apples, and dairy products, sustaining the family through the Great Depression, multiple wars, and economic downturns. It wasn't glamorous work, but it had instilled values that Elliot still carried with him, even if he'd strayed from practicing them in his parenting. Elliot's father, Clyde Harrington, had been a stern but fair man who believed character was forged through adversity and honest labor. "Nothing worth having comes easy," he would say as he roused Elliot and Oliver before dawn for morning chores. By age 10, Elliot knew how to milk cows, mend fences, and help with the harvest. By 14, he was driving tractors and helping balance the farm's precarious books. It was those accounting ledgers that first sparked Elliot's interest in mathematics and eventually computer programming. While Oliver embraced the physical aspects of farming, developing a deep connection to the land, Elliot gravitated towards systems and numbers, seeing patterns where others saw only figures. When Elliot won a full scholarship to the University of Washington's computer science program, his father had been proud but concerned. "Book learning's important," Clyde had said, "but don't forget where you come from. The real world doesn't run on theories." Elliot had nodded respectfully, but inwardly he'd already been planning his escape from rural life. The farm felt too small for his ambitions, too limiting for someone who dreamed of changing the world through technology. During his sophomore year, Clyde suffered a massive heart attack while working in the fields. By the time Oliver found him, it was too late. At the funeral, Oliver, then 25, had quietly assumed responsibility for the farm and their mother's care, never once suggesting Elliot abandon his education to help. "Finish what you started," Oliver had told him. Dad would have wanted that, so Elliot had returned to Seattle, immersing himself in coding and algorithm development, visiting the farm less and less frequently as his career accelerated. When he met Morgan, a brilliant art history professor at a university fundraiser, the final threads connecting him to rural life seemed to snap. Morgan was sophisticated, worldly, passionate about culture and humanitarian causes. Everything. The farm was not. They'd been blissfully happy for 15 years, building both a family and a corporate empire. Morgan had been Elliot's moral compass, insisting that his growing wealth be matched with philanthropy and social responsibility. She'd also been a natural mother, somehow balancing her academic career with genuine presence in Blake's childhood. Until the cancer took her. Just 42 years old, Blake had been 12, Elliot 45. In the aftermath of her death, Elliot had done what he knew best. He buried himself in work, pushing Harrington Technologies to new frontiers in medical AI, partly driven by the frustration of not having technology advanced enough to save his wife and Blake. Elliot sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He'd tried to compensate for Morgan's absence and his own emotional unavailability by removing all obstacles from Blake's path. Every hardship smoothed away, every desire immediately fulfilled, every failure quickly covered up or explained away. The result stood before him today. A young man with all of Morgan's natural charm and intelligence, but none of her compassion or work ethic. A young man who had never learned that actions have consequences or that true satisfaction comes from overcoming genuine challenges. Oliver had warned him years ago during one of Blake's prep school suspensions. "You're raising him in a bubble, Elliot. Kids need boundaries to feel secure. They need to fall down sometimes so they learn to pick themselves up." Elliot had dismissed the advice as outdated rural thinking, believing Blake's expensive therapists and college counselors knew better than his farmer brother. Now he wondered if Oliver had been right all along. His phone buzzed, a text from Oliver. "Just checking you're still serious about Blake coming tomorrow. Need to prepare things on my end." Elliot typed back, "Dead serious." He agreed, though not happily. "We'll arrive around noon." 3 dots appeared as Oliver composed his response. "Hope you know what you're doing. Farm life is a shock to the system for city folks." "That's the point," Elliot replied. "He needs a shock to his system." "Fair enough. Sarah's making up the old bunkhouse for him." Elliot smiled slightly, remembering the simple building where he and Oliver had slept as boys. Basic but comfortable, with windows that caught the morning sun and the distant sound of the creek that ran through the property. Oliver had married Sarah Jensen from the neighboring farm 30 years ago. They'd had one daughter, Zoe, now in her late 20s, and According to the Christmas cards Oliver faithfully sent, recently graduated from Washington State University with a degree in agricultural science. Unlike her cousin Blake, Zoe had worked for her education, attending community college for 2 years while helping on the farm before transferring to WSU. Elliot realized with a pang of shame that he had never met his niece in person, only seen her in photographs, another consequence of his gradual disconnection from his roots. Finishing his scotch, Elliot made his way to Blake's floor. The party had dispersed, but music still played softly behind his son's closed bedroom door. He knocked, not expecting a response. To his surprise, the door opened. Blake stood there, his earlier anger subdued into cold resentment. Behind him, Elliot could see several designer suitcases open on the bed, haphazardly filled with clothes that would be comically inappropriate for farm work. "I said I'd go," Blake said flatly. "You don't need to check up on me." "I know," Elliot replied. "I just wanted to say—" "This isn't just punishment, Blake. The farm was a good place to grow up. It taught me lessons I've carried my whole life." "Spare me the nostalgic farmer routine," Blake scoffed. "We both know you left that place behind the first chance you got." The words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. Elliot had escaped the farm, rarely looking back, sending money instead of making visits, creating distance that had grown into a chasm over decades. "Maybe that was a mistake," Elliot said quietly. "Maybe we both have something to learn from this." Blake looked momentarily startled by his father's admission, but quickly recovered his defensive posture. "Whatever, I'll do my time at farm prison and then things go back to normal. That's the deal." "We'll see," Elliot said, turning to leave. "We depart at 8 a.m. The company jet will take us to Yakima, then we'll drive to the farm." "Fine," Blake said, closing the door firmly. As Elliot walked away, he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake or finally doing what he should have done years ago. The truth was, he didn't know if the farm could work the same magic on Blake that it had on him as a boy. But he was out of alternatives, and sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Tomorrow, 2 worlds would collide, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The Harrington Technologies private jet soared over the Cascade Mountains, leaving the Seattle skyline far behind. In the luxuriously appointed cabin, Blake sat as far from his father as possible, designer sunglasses firmly in place despite the dim interior lighting. He hadn't spoken a word since takeoff, his attention fixed on the window as if the passing clouds might offer an escape route. Elliot reviewed quarterly reports on his tablet, occasionally glancing at his son. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. Elliot in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, already transitioning mentally to farm life, while Blake wore what he considered casual attire, limited edition sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly rent, artfully distressed jeans from a French designer, and a silk shirt that would be ruined by the first drop of sweat or speck of dust. As the jet began its descent into Yakima, Elliot finally broke the silence. "We'll be landing in a few minutes. Uncle Oliver will meet us at the airstrip." Blake removed his sunglasses, revealing bloodshot eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much. "Congratulations. You've successfully kidnapped your adult son and transported him across the state. Should I be developing Stockholm Syndrome by day 3 or 4? Elliot sighed. "This isn't a kidnapping, Blake. It's an opportunity." "An opportunity," Blake repeated incredulously. "To do what? Develop allergies? Get trampled by livestock? Die of boredom?" "To learn something about yourself, about where you come from, about what it means to earn something, instead of expecting it to be handed to you." "I know exactly who I am," Blake snapped, "and where I come from is Seattle, not whatever cow town we're landing in." "Silver Lake," Elliot supplied. "Population, 1 to 800, and half your DNA comes from this place, whether you like it or not." The jet touched down on a small regional airstrip where a weather-beaten pickup truck waited on the tarmac. Blake peered through the window and groaned. "Please tell me that's not our ride." "That would be Uncle Oliver's truck." "Been running for over 25 years, Elliot said with undisguised fondness. "You're not even staying." For the first time, genuine alarm flashed across Blake's face. "Just long enough to get you settled. I have a board meeting tomorrow I can't miss." "You're just dumping me with strangers?" "Oliver is hardly a stranger. He's my brother, and Sarah makes the best apple pie you'll ever taste." Elliot unbuckled his seatbelt as the plane came to a stop. "They're good people, Blake, salt of the earth, as they say." "Oh my God," Blake muttered. "You sound like a country music cliché." As they deplaned into the bright midday sun, Blake winced and hurriedly replaced his sunglasses. The heat was different here, dry and intense, nothing like Seattle's temperate climate. A tall man in his early 60s approached, dressed in worn jeans, a faded plaid shirt, and a battered straw hat. His face was tanned and weathered from decades in the sun, with deep creases that deepened as he broke into a warm smile. "Elliot Harrington," he called, striding forward with hand extended. "Still looking like you just stepped off the cover of Fortune magazine, I see." Elliot grasped his hand, then pulled his brother into a tight hug. "Oliver, it's been too long." 5 years, Oliver confirmed, clapping Elliot on the back. "Not since Mom's funeral." A shadow crossed Elliot's face. "I know, I should have visited more. You're a busy man, we understand." Oliver's gaze shifted to Blake, who stood stiffly beside the plane. "And this must be your son. Last time I saw you, young man, you were about knee-high to a grasshopper." Blake offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Charming. I don't remember you at all." If Oliver was offended by the coldness, he didn't show it. Memory's a funny thing. Sometimes the most important parts of our past get buried until we need them again. He gestured to his truck. "Let's get your bags loaded up. Got a full day ahead, and the cows don't much care if we're running behind schedule." The pilot and co-pilot were already unloading Blake's luggage. 3 large designer suitcases that looked comically out of place next to the mud-splattered pickup. "I said pack for a month, not move in permanently," Elliot commented, eyeing the mountain of bags. "You said pack practical things." "This is me being practical," Blake retorted, "unless you expected me to wear the same outfit for 30 days. Oliver unchuckled. "Don't you worry none about that. Sarah's got a washing machine, runs just fine most days, unless the septic's acting up." Blake's expression of horror made both men struggle to contain their amusement as Oliver began loading the luggage into the truck bed. Blake pulled his father aside. "This isn't funny anymore, Dad. You've made your point. I'll be more responsible. I'll show up to the next company event. I'll even apologize to those donors personally." Elliot studied his son's face. "This isn't just about one missed event, Blake. It's about who you're becoming. You're better than the spoiled, entitled person you've been acting like. So this is what? Some kind of character improvement program? Poverty tourism to make me appreciate my privilege?" Blake's voice dripped with sarcasm. "No, it's a chance to connect with a part of your heritage that you've never known, the part that made me who I am. I don't need to shovel manure to appreciate that you grew up poor, Dad." Elliot shook his head. "That's not what this is about. We weren't poor in the ways that mattered. We had food on the table, a roof over our heads, and love in our home. What we lacked in material wealth, we made up for in other ways." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Blake muttered. "All packed up," Oliver announced, securing the last suitcase under a tarp. "Ready when you are, Mr. Harrington." Blake turned to his father, a last desperate appeal in his eyes. "Dad, please don't do this." Elliot hesitated. In that moment, Blake looked so much like Morgan, the same stubborn set to his jaw, the same vulnerability behind his defiance. But he thought of the path Blake was heading down, of the empty, purposeless life that awaited him if something didn't change. 1 month, he said firmly. "You can do anything for 1 month. I'll never forgive you for this," Blake whispered. "Maybe," Elliot acknowledged, "but I hope someday you'll thank me." Tears threatened, but Blake blinked them back furiously. With deliberate movements, he reached into his designer messenger bag and removed his smartphone, smartwatch, tablet, and credit cards, thrusting them at his father. "Fine. Take them. I won't need reminders of civilization where I'm going." Elliot accepted the items, surprised by his initiative. "You can keep your phone for emergencies. No social media, though." "What's the point? There's probably no reception anyway." Blake glanced at the vast emptiness surrounding them. "And who would I call? My father who exiled me? My friends who will forget I exist the minute I'm gone?" The bitterness in his voice made Elliot wince. "Oliver has my number if you need anything, and I'll call to check in." "Don't bother." Blake turned and stalked toward the truck, his impractical sneakers kicking up dust with each step. He yanked, opened the passenger door, and climbed in without another word or backward glance. Oliver approached Elliot, speaking quietly. "He's got fire in him just like you did at that age." "Too much fire and not enough direction," Elliot replied. "We'll do our best," Oliver promised. "But you know as well as anyone, the farm doesn't change people. It just shows them who they really are." As Oliver climbed into the driver's seat, Elliot approached the passenger window. Blake stared straight ahead, refusing to look at him. "I love you, Blake," he said softly. "Remember that." Blake gave no indication he'd heard. The truck's engine roared to life, belching a cloud of dust as Oliver put it in gear. Elliot stood watching as the vehicle pulled away, carrying his son toward an experience he hoped would change his life. Only when the truck had disappeared down the rural road did he allow doubt to creep in. Was he doing the right thing? Or was he about to permanently damage his relationship with the only family he had left? The sound of the jet engines warming up again pulled him from his thoughts. His phone buzzed with notifications, crisis at the office, questions about the MedAccess initiative, board members demanding updates on international partnerships. Reality beckoned, as it always did. Elliot turned and walked back to the plane, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. There was nothing more he could do for Blake now, except hope that the farm would work its magic on him just as it once had on Elliot himself. The truck rumbled down a long gravel driveway flanked by wooden fencing, finally coming to a stop before a two-story farmhouse. The white clapboard structure with its wide front porch and green shutters looked like something from a country living magazine, charming but worlds away from the sleek modern architecture Blake was accustomed to. "Home sweet home," Oliver announced, cutting the engine. "Been in Sarah's family for 5 generations now." Blake remained motionless in his seat, staring at the farmhouse with undisguised apprehension. Beyond it, he could see various outbuildings, fields dotted with grazing cattle, and what appeared to be an ancient tractor parked near a weathered red barn. No high-rises, no boutiques, no crowds of people, just open space and isolation. "You are coming?" Oliver asked, already out of the truck and unloading bags. With a deep sigh, Blake pushed open the door and stepped out, his limited-edition sneakers immediately sinking into the soft earth of the driveway. He grimaced as mud splattered the pristine white leather. "Might want to watch your step," Oliver said, failing to hide his amusement. "Spring thaw leaves the ground a bit soft." Before Blake could respond, the farmhouse door swung open. A woman in her late 50s emerged, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her silver-streaked auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore jeans and a well-worn flannel shirt similar to Oliver's. Despite the casual attire, there was a quiet dignity in her posture and warmth in her smile. "You must be Blake," she called, descending the porch steps. "I'm Sarah Harrington, Oliver's wife. Welcome to our home." Blake forced a smile, extending a hand professionally. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Harrington." Sarah bypassed the hand and pulled him into a firm hug instead. "We don't stand on ceremony around here, and it's just Sarah, honey." Stiffening at the unexpected physical contact, Blake awkwardly patted the woman's back until she released him. "You're just in time for lunch," Sarah continued. "Nothing fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs better than those city meals that cost more than a decent pair of work gloves." "Oh, I don't really eat lunch," Blake said quickly. "Just coffee, usually." Oliver and Sarah exchanged glances. "Well, on the farm, meals aren't optional," Oliver explained. "Days start early and run long. You need fuel to keep going." "I'm really not hungry," Blake insisted. "You will be by mid-afternoon," Sarah predicted, "and we don't stop work for snack breaks." A screen door slammed and a young woman strode out of the house. Tall and athletic, with sun-streaked brown hair, pulled into a practical braid, she moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in their surroundings. She wore work-worn jeans, muddy boots, and a faded T-shirt from Washington State University that read Agricultural Sciences across the front. "That the city cousin?" she asked bluntly, looking Blake up and down with undisguised skepticism. "Zoe," Sarah chided, "mind your manners. This is Blake Harrington, Elliot's son. He's staying with us for the summer." "Harrington," the young woman's eyebrows raised slightly. "As in Harrington Technologies, the medical AI company." Blake's chin lifted, a flicker of his usual confidence returning. At least someone here recognized his family's status. "That's right. My father is the CEO and founder." Zoe let out a low whistle. "No kidding. I referenced your father's neural network designs in my senior thesis on predictive crop disease modeling. Didn't know he grew up around here." "Agricultural sciences." Blake couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. He'd assumed everyone here would be simple farmers with little education. "Washington State," Zoe confirmed. "When I'm not helping run this place, I'm developing drought-resistant growing systems for small-scale producers." She gestured to his luggage. "Need help with those bags?" Before he could answer, she'd already hoisted one of his largest suitcases with ease. "I'll take this up to the bunkhouse. Mom's got lunch waiting, and Dad needs help with the Southfield irrigation after." As Zoe disappeared around the side of the house, Blake found himself momentarily speechless. His preconceptions about rural life were already being challenged, and he'd been here less than 10 minutes. "That girl," Sarah said fondly, watching her daughter, "always rushing from one thing to the next." She turned to Blake. "Come on in and get settled. You can freshen up before lunch if you'd like." Blake followed Sarah into the farmhouse, immediately enveloped by the scent of fresh bread, herbs, and something savory simmering on the stove. The interior was rustic but well-maintained, hardwood floors, comfortable furniture that prioritized function over fashion, and walls lined with family photographs spanning decades. "The bathroom's down that hall," Sarah pointed. "The bunkhouse is just behind the main house. That's where you'll be staying. It's nothing fancy, but the bed's comfortable." "Thank you," Blake murmured, feeling increasingly out of place in his expensive outfit and impractical shoes. "There's a pair of work boots by the back door that should fit you," Sarah added, "and Oliver's left some of his old work clothes in the bunkhouse. They might be a bit big, but they'll do until we can get you proper things from town." "I brought clothes," Blake protested. Sarah's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Honey, those designer things you packed won't last a day around here. Farm work is hard on clothes." Before Blake could argue further, a tall, lean man in his 30s entered through the back door, removing a dust-covered hat as he did so. His tanned face broke into a friendly smile when he spotted Blake. "So you're the prodigal cousin," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Morgan Shepherd, ranch foreman and occasional voice of reason around here." Blake shook the offered hand, wincing slightly at the man's firm grip. "Blake Harrington. Morgan's been with us for about 10 years now," Sarah explained. "Don't know what we'd do without him, especially since Zoe's been splitting her time between the farm and her research." projects. Sarah exaggerates, Morgan said good-naturedly. I just try to keep things running smooth so the bosses can focus on the big picture. He glanced down at Blake's mud-splattered sneakers. Might want to change those before lunch. Oliver's planning to show you the operation this afternoon, and those won't make it 10 steps in the south field. As if on cue, Oliver appeared at the door. Blake, why don't you head out to the bunkhouse and get changed? Lunch is in 15 minutes, and then we'll take a tour of the property. First day's just for getting oriented. The bunkhouse was a small but neat structure behind the main farmhouse. With its rough-hewn wooden walls and simple furnishings, it reminded Blake of the luxury glamping resort he'd once visited in Montana. Except there was nothing glamorous about this place. A twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a simple wooden dresser, a desk with a reading lamp, and a small bathroom with a shower stall comprised the entire living space. His suitcases sat in the middle of the floor, looking absurdly out of place. On the bed lay neatly folded clothes, worn jeans, flannel shirts, and T-shirts with a note in flowing handwriting. These might be more comfortable than what you're used to. Sarah Blake sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. The reality of his situation was sinking in. This wasn't a luxury resort with farm-themed activities. This was actual rural life with real work, real animals, and real people who seemed to expect him to participate fully in their daily routines. He considered calling his father, demanding he come get him immediately. But his pride wouldn't let him surrender so quickly. Instead, he reluctantly changed into a pair of the borrowed jeans, too loose in the waist, too short in the leg, and a faded flannel shirt that smelled faintly of cedar. He tried to make the outfit look more stylish by rolling the sleeves and leaving several buttons undone, but the mirror on the wall reflected back an image so unlike his usual self that he almost laughed. "Blake! Lunch!" Sarah's voice called from the main house. With a final glance at his reflection, Blake squared his shoulders and headed toward the farmhouse. Whatever orientation Oliver had planned, he would endure it with as much dignity as possible. After all, how hard could farm life really be? He was about to find out. The Harrington farmhouse kitchen was nothing like the sleek, minimalist space Blake was accustomed to in Seattle. Here, well-worn wooden countertops bore the marks of decades of use. Copper pots hung from a ceiling rack, and a massive farmhouse table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs that had clearly been added over the years as the family grew. Blake took the empty seat beside Sarah, eyeing the spread with trepidation. A steaming pot of what appeared to be homemade stew, freshly baked bread, and a large bowl of garden salad covered the table. Simple fare, but the aromas made his stomach growl despite his earlier protestations about not being hungry. "Dig in," Oliver encouraged, passing Blake a bowl. "Nothing fancy, but Sarah's beef stew is famous in 3 counties. It's from our own cattle," Sarah explained, filling Blake's bowl before he could protest. "And the vegetables are from last year's garden. We believe in knowing where our food comes from." Blake looked down at the hearty stew, so different from the carefully plated, artfully arranged meals he typically consumed at trendy Seattle restaurants. He took a tentative bite, surprised by the rich flavor and depth. "It's good," he admitted, reluctantly. "High praise indeed," Zoe quipped, breaking off a chunk of bread. "We'll make a country boy of you yet." "I wouldn't count on that," Blake muttered, but he continued eating with more enthusiasm than he'd intended to show. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally between farm business, local gossip, and plans for the coming week. Blake remained largely silent, observing the easy familiarity between the family members and Morgan, the foreman. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a shorthand developed over years of working together that made him feel distinctly like an outsider. "So, Blake," Morgan said, seeming to sense his discomfort. Your father said you're involved with his company's foundation work? Blake shifted uncomfortably. Sort of. I'm technically the VP of Community Implementation. Impressive title, Oliver remarked. What does that involve? Supposedly overseeing how our medical diagnostic technology gets deployed in underserved communities, Blake replied, pushing a piece of carrot around his bowl. But honestly, it's mostly a figurehead position. My father created it after I left. Stanford left? Zoe raised an eyebrow. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Uncle Elliot mentioned you dropped out. Blake shot her an irritated glance. It wasn't challenging me. Ah, Zoe nodded sagely. I'm sure poverty and disease in developing nations won't be challenging either. Zoe, Sarah warned, be nice. I'm just saying, Zoe continued, undeterred. Seems like a waste of a good education. Do you know how many people would kill for a chance at Stanford? Why don't we save the interrogation for later? Oliver suggested mildly. Blake's barely had a chance to get his bearings. The meal concluded with apple pie that, as Elliot had promised, was indeed extraordinary. As they finished, Oliver stood and stretched. Time to show you around the property, he said to Blake. Boots are by the back door. I'd suggest you wear them. It's been a wet spring. The boots were weathered and cracked, at least a size too big, and smelling faintly of barn. Blake pulled them on with a grimace, following Oliver out into the afternoon sun. Silver Lake Farm covers about 200 acres, Oliver explained as they walked. Mostly agricultural land, with some pasture for the cattle. We run a diversified operation: dairy, wheat, vegetables, and a small apple orchard. Keeps us from putting all our eggs in one basket, economically speaking. Blake nodded absently, his attention caught by the sheer vastness of the landscape. In every direction, there was nothing but open space. Fields, scattered trees, distant, mountains on the horizon. The endless sky above seemed impossibly big compared to the narrow slices visible between Seattle's skyscrapers. It's so empty, he murmured. Oliver chuckled. Not empty, just spacious. There's life everywhere you look, if you know how to see it. He led Blake to a large red barn, pushing open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the barn was surprisingly clean and well organized, with modern milking equipment that looked out of place amid the rustic surroundings. Stalls lined either side, most occupied by large black and white Holstein cows that regarded Blake with placid indifference. We've got 40 dairy cows currently, Oliver explained, moving confidently among the animals. Each one needs milking. Twice a day, every day. No weekends off, no holidays. The machines do that, right? Blake asked hopefully, eyeing the equipment. Machines help, but there's prep work, cleanup and monitoring to be done by human hands, Oliver replied. He gestured for Blake to come closer to one of the cows. This here's Buttercup, one of our gentlest ladies, good one to learn on. Blake hesitantly approached, fighting the urge to recoil as the cow turned its large head toward him, nostrils flaring. She won't bite, Oliver assured him. Now, first thing we do is clean her udder. Sanitation is crucial in dairy production. He demonstrated the process, then handed Blake a cloth. Your turn. You want me to touch it? Blake asked, staring at the cow's udder with a mixture of disgust and fear. That's generally how cleaning works, Oliver replied patiently. Come on now, nothing to be afraid of. Buttercup here has given more milk than you can imagine. She's a professional. Tentatively, Blake reached out and dabbed at the cow's udder, barely making contact. You'll need to be a bit more thorough than that, Oliver said. Think of it like washing your hands, firm but gentle. Grimacing, Blake forced himself to apply more pressure, cleaning each teat as Oliver had demonstrated. The cow shifted slightly, causing Blake to jump back with a small shriek. She's just getting comfortable, Oliver assured him. Keep going. By the time the cleaning was done, Blake's face was flushed with embarrassment and effort. Now what? He asked, desperate to be finished with the task. Now we attach the milking cups, Oliver demonstrated with practiced efficiency, connecting the milking apparatus to Buttercup's udder. The machine hummed to life, and milk began flowing through. Clear tubes into a storage tank. Each cow gives about 6 to 8 gallons a day, Oliver explained. We milk morning and evening, same schedule every day. Animals thrive on routine. For the next hour, Oliver guided Blake through the milking process with several cows. By the third animal, Blake's initial disgust had given way to focused concentration as he tried to master the technique. It was harder than it looked, requiring a surprising amount of strength in his hands and arms. Not bad for your first time, Oliver acknowledged as they finished. Tomorrow you'll do more on your own. There's more? Blake asked, flexing his sore fingers. Oliver laughed. Son, we've barely scratched the surface. Milking's just one small part of running a dairy farm. Wait till you learn about feed mixing, field maintenance, and calf care. Blake's heart sank. He'd thought surviving the milking would be the extent of his challenges for the day. Apparently, they were just getting started. The afternoon progressed in a blur of unfamiliar tasks. After the milking came feeding, which involved hauling heavy bags of grain and buckets of water. Then came mucking out stalls, a process that had Blake gagging at first as he shoveled manure into wheelbarrows. By dinner time, his designer manicure was ruined, his borrowed clothes were filthy, and muscles he didn't know he had were screaming in protest. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Blake felt a strange mix of exhaustion and something unexpected, a tiny flicker of accomplishment. He'd survived his first afternoon of farm work without quitting or breaking down in tears. It was a low bar, but it was something. In the distance, the farmhouse lights glowed welcomingly as dusk settled over the land. Blake had never been so eager for a shower and bed in his life. Just 11 more hours until he could collapse, and then he realized with dawning horror they'd do it all again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. 29 more days of this. What had he gotten himself into? By the end of his third day at Silver Lake Farm, every muscle in Blake's body screamed in protest. His once soft hands were developing blisters despite the work gloves Sarah had given him. His designer clothes remained, untouched in his suitcases as he rotated through the borrowed work clothes that were better suited for the endless chores Oliver assigned. The routine was relentless. 4:30 a.m. wake-up calls, hearty breakfasts he was now too hungry to refuse, and long days of physical labor that left him collapsing into bed by 9 p.m. From milking cows to mucking stalls, hauling feed to mending fences, Blake had experienced more manual labor in 3 days than in his entire previous life. This is absolutely ridiculous, he muttered to himself on the morning of his 4th day as he struggled to pull on the mud-caked work boots. I have a business degree from Stanford. I shouldn't be shoveling manure like some medieval peasant. The fact that his father had indeed done this very work as a young man only irritated him further. He'd heard the story at breakfast yesterday, how Elliot Harrington had worked these same fields, tended these same animals, or their ancestors, all while maintaining perfect grades and applying to colleges. Your dad never complained, Oliver had remarked, noticing Blake's exhaustion. Not once in all the years I knew him. Well, I'm not my father, Blake had snapped back. Now, as he trudged across the muddy yard toward the milking parlor for the morning routine, Blake pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal, as usual, but he'd taken to recording voice memos, partly to document his imprisonment, as he called it, and partly to maintain his sanity through one-sided conversations. Day 4 of farm prison, he spoke into the device. Still, no sign of civilization. My hair smells permanently of cow, my nails are destroyed, and I think I pulled something in my lower back yesterday lifting hay bales. This is clearly a violation of the Geneva Convention. He paused, looking up at the vast Montana sky, just beginning to lighten with dawn. Despite himself, he added, "Though I will admit the sunrise here is impressive." "Talking to yourself?" Blake, startled, nearly dropping his phone as Zoe emerged from the barn. Unlike him, she seemed completely at ease with the early hour and demanding work, moving with an energy that Blake couldn't fathom mustering before at least 3 espressos. "Just keeping a record of my suffering," he replied quickly, pocketing the phone, "for the inevitable tell-all memoir." Zoe smirked. "You city people always think farm work is going to kill you, yet somehow millions of us manage to survive it every day." "Yes, well, some of us weren't raised doing manual labor since childhood," Blake retorted. "Some of us have valuable skills that don't involve cow excrement." "Like what?" Zoe asked, leaning against the barn door with genuine curiosity. "What exactly do you do back in Seattle?" The question caught Blake off guard. What did he do exactly? He'd never held an actual job. His father had created positions for him at Harrington Technologies, mostly ceremonial roles that he'd treated as optional. He managed his social media accounts, attended parties, shopped, exercised. "I represent my father's company at social functions," he said finally. "I'm involved with our corporate philanthropy initiatives." It sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Huh," Zoe said non-committally. "Well, the cows are waiting, and unlike charity galas, they don't care if you're running fashionably late." Irritation flared in Blake's chest as he followed her into the barn. "You don't know anything about me or my life." "True," Zoe conceded, handing him a cleaning cloth for the others. "And you don't know anything about ours. But at least I'm trying to learn about your world. I read tech journals. I follow advances in agricultural AI. What have you bothered to learn about farming since you got here?" The question stung because it contained an uncomfortable truth. Blake had approached each task with the bare minimum. Effort required, focus solely on getting through the month of punishment, rather than understanding the work or the people who did it. "I don't need to learn about farming," he replied defensively. "I'll be gone in a few weeks, back to civilization, where food comes from grocery stores, not directly from animals." Zoe shook her head. "And that right there is the problem with most people. No idea where their food comes from or what it takes to produce it." She moved to the first cow, demonstrating again the proper cleaning technique. "You know your dad revolutionized agricultural AI, right? Some of his early algorithms help small farms like ours predict milk production, optimize feeding schedules, even detect early signs of illness in livestock." Blake paused, cloth in hand. "What?" "No. He's known for consumer tech, neural interfaces, medical diagnostics. That's what made him famous." "Sure. But some of his first successful programs were ag tech." Zoe looked at him with sudden understanding. "You really don't know much about your father's work, do you?" The observation hit harder than Blake wanted to admit. He'd always viewed his father's business as boring technical stuff, something that provided their lifestyle, but not worth understanding in detail. Had he missed fundamental parts of who Elliot Harrington really was? Discomfort with the conversation made him focus intently on the cow before him, cleaning the udder with more care than he'd shown previously. "I know enough," he said curtly. They worked in silence for a while, moving methodically from cow to cow. Despite his resistance, Blake found himself becoming more efficient at the task, his movements more confident than they had been on day one. "Not bad," Zoe commented as they finished the last cow. "You're a quick learner when you actually try." The backhanded compliment rankled, but Blake couldn't deny the tiny spark of satisfaction he felt at mastering even this small skill. He quickly suppressed it. Getting competent at farm chores wasn't something to feel proud of. It was just survival until he could escape. After morning milking came breakfast, which Blake now approached with genuine hunger rather than reluctance. Sarah's homemade pancakes and bacon, something he would have scoffed at a week ago, now tasted like the finest cuisine after hours of physical work. "You're getting some color in your cheeks," Sarah remarked as Blake helped himself to seconds. "Fresh air and honest work will do that." "Sunburn and exhaustion, more likely," Blake replied, though with less bite than he might have managed a few days earlier. It was hard to maintain active hostility towards Sarah, whose kindness remained steadfast despite his attitude. "Oliver wants you to help with the calves today," Sarah continued, refilling Blake's coffee cup. "It's a good opportunity to see the gentler side of farming, as opposed to all the glamorous manure shoveling I've been doing," Blake asked dryly. Sarah just smiled. "You might be surprised. There's something special about working with the young ones." After breakfast, Blake followed Oliver to a separate enclosure where a dozen calves, ranging from a few days to several weeks old, were housed. Unlike the milking parlour's utilitarian atmosphere, the calf barn had a warmer, nurturing feel. "These little ones need special care," Oliver explained, gesturing to the youngest calf, a wobbly-legged creature with enormous eyes. "This one arrived just yesterday. We call her Maple." "What about its mother?" Blake asked, watching the small animal with reluctant interest. "We separate them after a day or so," Oliver explained. "In a modern dairy operation, the calves are hand-raised so the mothers can return to milk production." Blake frowned. "That seems cruel." "It's the reality of a working farm," Oliver replied. "We don't have the luxury of sentimentality, but we make sure they're well cared for." He handed Blake a large bottle with a rubber nipple. "Which is where you come in today. These little ones need to be bottle-fed." The calf's eagerness as Blake approached with the bottle was both endearing and intimidating. It butted against his legs with surprising strength, nearly knocking him over in its enthusiasm for the milk replacer. "Whoa there!" Oliver laughed, steadying him. "They don't have the best manners at this age. Hold the bottle like this and keep your stance wide for balance." Blake found himself smiling despite his determination to remain detached as the calf latched onto the bottle and began sucking vigorously. There was something undeniably sweet about the creature's trust and vulnerability. "She likes you," Oliver observed. "She likes the bottle," Blake corrected. "I'm just the delivery system." Oliver shrugged. "Maybe so, but you've got a gentle touch. With her, that matters more than you might think." For the rest of the morning, Blake moved from calf to calf, feeding each one under Oliver's watchful eye. The work was less physically demanding than mucking stalls, but required a different kind of attention and care. By the time they finished, Blake's resistance had softened slightly, though he'd never admit it aloud. "You did good work today," Oliver said as they walked back to the house for lunch. "Those calves are the future of our herd. Every healthy calf means security for the farm down the line. The concept of planning years ahead, of work today creating security for tomorrow, was foreign to Blake's usual live-in-the-moment mindset. In his world, satisfaction was immediate or not at all. "Do you ever get tired of it?" he asked suddenly. "The routine, the endless chores, being tied to this place every day?" Oliver considered the question thoughtfully. "Sure. Some days are harder than others. Winter mornings when it's 20 below zero and the equipment freezes, when a cow gets sick and you're up all night trying to save her, when milk prices drop, and you're counting pennies to make payroll." He gazed across the fields, pride evident in his expression. "But there's something to building something that lasts, something real. My grandfather worked this land. My father expanded it. Now Zoe's bringing new ideas that'll carry it into the future. There's a legacy here that money can't buy." The word legacy struck Blake unexpectedly. What was his legacy? Instagram posts, party invitations, shopping receipts. For the first time, he wondered if his resistance to his father's expectations wasn't just rebellion, but fear. Fear that he had nothing substantial to offer beyond being Elliot Harrington's son. The second week at Silver Lake Farm brought rain. Endless. Sheets of it that transformed the farmyard into a muddy obstacle course and made every outdoor task twice as difficult. Blake stood at his bunkhouse window early Monday morning, watching water cascade from the roof gutters and pool in the driveway. Below, perfect, he muttered. Just perfect. A knock at his door interrupted his contemplation of the dismal weather. Sarah poked her head in, already dressed in a raincoat and boots. "Morning, Blake. Figured you might need these." She held out a yellow raincoat and matching rain hat. "They're Oliver's from a few years back. Should fit you all right." Blake accepted the items with a nod of thanks. After a week on the farm, his initial hostility towards Sarah had mellowed into something closer to reluctant respect. The woman managed the household, helped with farm chores, maintained a large vegetable garden, and still found time to bake bread from scratch and volunteer at the local library 2 afternoons a week. It was exhausting just watching her. "Does it always rain like this?" Blake asked, shrugging into the raincoat. "Spring in Washington," Sarah replied with a shrug. "We need it for the pastures and crops, even if it makes life a bit messier for a while." She smiled. "Oliver says to meet him in the equipment barn when you're ready. He's got something different planned today." Different sounded promising. After a week of rotating through the same physically demanding chores, Blake was desperate for variety, even if it still involved farm work. The equipment barn turned out to be a cavernous structure filled with tractors, attachments, tools, and machinery that Blake couldn't begin to identify. Oliver was at a workbench surrounded by parts and tools, with a tractor engine partially disassembled before him. "Perfect timing," he called as Blake entered, shaking rainwater from his borrowed hat. "The old John Deere picked a fine day to have. Injection problems. And that means," Blake asked, approaching cautiously, "that means we're doing maintenance today instead of field work," Oliver explained, gesturing for him to join him at the bench. "Every farmer needs to know basic mechanics. Equipment breaks down, and the nearest repair shop is an hour away if they can even fit you in." Blake eyed the greasy components with trepidation. "I don't know the first thing about engines." "That's why we call it learning," Oliver replied patiently. "Hand me that socket wrench, would you? The one with the red handle." Blake surveyed the array of tools, having no idea which was a socket wrench. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up a tool with a red handle and handed it over. "That's a screwdriver," Oliver said without judgment. "The wrench has a metal socket on the end." Heat rose in Blake's cheeks. At home, his ignorance about practical matters had never bothered him. Mechanics fixed cars, plumbers fixed pipes, IT specialists fixed computers. That's why his father paid them. But here, such ignorance felt like a personal failing. This one, he tried again, selecting another tool. "That's it," Oliver confirmed. "Now watch carefully. I'll show you how this fuel injection system works." For the next hour, Oliver guided him through the basics of diesel engine maintenance, explaining each component's function, demonstrating proper cleaning techniques, and allowing him to perform simple tasks under his supervision. To Blake's surprise, he found himself genuinely interested. There was something satisfying about understanding how things worked, about the logical progression of mechanical systems. "You've got a good eye for detail," Oliver remarked as Blake meticulously cleaned a fuel filter, important quality in engine work. "I used to help my roommate with his coding projects in college," Blake replied, then immediately felt foolish, comparing computer programming to diesel engine maintenance. But Oliver just nodded. "Steady hand, good focus, same skills, different application. Your dad was good at detail work too, used to fix all our calculators and radios as a kid." That mechanical thinking translated well to computer programming later on, another piece of his father's past that Blake had never known. He'd always seen his father's technical abilities as something innate, never considering they might have. Developed from practical skills, learned on the farm. What was he like? Blake found himself asking. As a teenager, I mean. Oliver leaned back against the workbench, a distant look crossing his weathered face. Driven, always had his mind on the future, while the rest of us were thinking about the next county fair or football game. Elliot was planning his escape. He paused. Not that he didn't work hard here. He did. But we all knew this place was too small to hold him. Did you ever want to leave? Blake asked, continuing his work on the filter. For a spell, Oliver admitted. Spent 4 years in the army after high school. Saw enough of the world to know where I belonged. Came back, married Sarah, and took over the farm when my dad's health started failing. And you don't regret it? Staying? Oliver considered the question seriously. Regret's a waste of energy in my experience. Every life has its trade-offs. I chose this one, with all its hardships and rewards. Your dad chose another path. Neither one's right or wrong, just different roads to different destinations. His words lingered in Blake's mind as they continued working on the engine. He'd never thought of life as a series of conscious choices, each with its own consequences. His path had always seemed predetermined by his birth into wealth and privilege. By midday, the rain had intensified, drumming against the metal roof of the barn with a sound like distant applause. Oliver declared the engine work done for the day. They'd continue reassembly tomorrow, when Morgan could help with the heavier components. What now? Blake asked, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Now we check the livestock, Oliver replied, zipping up his raincoat. Rain or shine, animals need tending. They sprinted across the muddy yard to the main barn, arriving soaked despite their rain gear. Inside, the cows were restless, disturbed by the storm's intensity. One of the younger animals was particularly agitated, pacing her stall and making distressed sounds. That's Daisy, Oliver explained, approaching the nervous cow. First-time mother, and not handling the stress of the storm well. Sometimes they need extra reassurance. To Blake's amazement, Oliver began speaking to the cow in low, soothing tones while running his hand along her flank. Gradually, the animal calmed, leaning slightly into his touch. Here, he said, gesturing Blake closer. She knows you from milking. Let her feel your presence too. Hesitantly, Blake placed his hand on the cow's side, feeling the warmth and the steady rhythm of breathing beneath the hide. Following Oliver's example, he spoke softly, nonsense words in a gentle tone. To his surprise, the cow responded, the dense muscles relaxing slightly under his touch. She likes you, Oliver observed. She's just responding to the calm voice, Blake countered, echoing his earlier comment about the calf. Maybe, Oliver conceded. But animals are good judges of character. They sense more than we give them credit for. They moved through the barn, checking each animal, adjusting feed, and ensuring the building remained secure against the storm. By the time they finished, the physical evidence of Blake's morning mechanical work, the grease stains on his borrowed jeans, the dirt under his fingernails, had been joined by hay dust and animal hair. A week ago, such a state would have horrified him. Now he barely noticed. As they prepared to dash back to the house for lunch, Oliver's phone rang, a rare interruption to the day's routine. His expression grew serious as he listened to the caller. Understood. We'll be ready. He hung up and turned to Blake. That was the emergency management office. Flash flood warning for the creek that runs along our east pasture. We need to move the heifers to higher ground before it gets worse. In this? Blake gestured toward the torrential rain outside. Nature doesn't wait for convenient weather, Oliver replied grimly. I'll get Morgan from the workshop. You run to the house and tell Sarah we need the emergency plan. She'll know what that means. Without waiting for a response, he strode out into the deluge. Blake hesitated only briefly before following, running toward the farmhouse with a sense of urgency he'd never felt for anything in his previous life. Sarah was in the kitchen monitoring a weather report on a small radio when Blake burst through the door, dripping water onto the floor. Oliver sent me, he explained breathlessly. Something about a flash flood warning and an emergency plan. Understanding immediately, Sarah moved to a drawer and pulled out a laminated map of the farm. The creek's flooding. We need to move livestock and secure equipment. She handed Blake a thermos. Fill this with coffee while I pack some sandwiches. The men might be out there for hours. What about me? Blake asked. What should I do? Sarah looked up, surprised by the question. You'll go with them, of course. They'll need every hand available. But I don't know anything about flood management, Blake protested. I'll just get in the way. You've been here over a week, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. You know enough to follow instructions and provide an extra set of hands. That's what matters in an emergency. 15 minutes later, Blake found himself in the back of Oliver's truck, wedged between Morgan and a pile of equipment as they bounced along a muddy track toward the eastern pasture. The rain was coming down in sheets, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. We'll need to set up barriers to divert water from the equipment shed, Oliver was explaining. Morgan, you take the sandbags. Blake can help you fill and stack them. I'll get the heifers moved first. They're the priority. Blake expected Morgan to protest being paired with him for such a crucial task, but the foreman simply nodded, his expression focused on the job ahead. The creek, usually a gentle stream, meandering along the property's edge, had transformed into a swollen, angry torrent. Water had already breached its banks in several places, creating small islands where expanses of pasture had been just hours before. As Oliver headed toward the frightened cattle visible on a low rise, Morgan directed the truck to a spot near the equipment shed, which stood perilously close to the advancing water. We need to build a sandbag wall along this side, he explained, jumping out into ankle-deep water. Fast as we can. For the next hour, Blake worked alongside Morgan in the pouring rain, filling burlap sacks with sand from a pile stored specifically for this purpose, tying them off and stacking them in a strategic pattern to redirect the flow of water away from the structure. The work was backbreaking. Each bag weighed 30 pounds or more when filled, and the conditions were miserable. Rain pelted them relentlessly, mud sucked at their boots, and the rising water created a constant battle against time. Somewhere, in the midst of this grueling labor, something shifted in Blake. The usual internal monologue of complaints and self-pity fell silent, replaced by a singular focus on the task at hand. Each sandbag was a small victory against the elements, each completed section of the barrier a tangible accomplishment. You're not half bad at this, Morgan commented as they placed another bag. Thought you'd have given up after the first 10 minutes. So did I, Blake admitted, wiping rain from his face with a muddy sleeve. They stood back to examine their work. The improvised wall wasn't perfect, but it was diverting the worst of the rushing water around the shed rather than into it. Not pretty, but it'll hold, Morgan declared. Let's check on Oliver. They found Oliver on the other side of the property, just finishing herding the last of the young cattle to higher ground. The animals were distressed but safe, clustered, together on an elevated area that the floodwaters couldn't reach. Good timing, Oliver called out as they approached. Wall holding? For now, Morgan confirmed. Creek still rising, though? Oliver nodded grimly. We need to check the lower field drainage culverts. If they're blocked, we'll lose the winter. A wheat. As they piled back into the truck, Blake caught a glimpse of himself in the side mirror, soaked to the skin, mud splattered across his face, hair plastered to his head beneath the rain hat. He looked nothing like the polished socialite who had arrived at the farm, yet strangely he felt more alive than he had in years. The emergency lasted well into evening, with the Harringtons and Blake moving from one crisis point to another across the property, clearing blocked drainage ditches, rescuing equipment from the path of rising water, reinforcing barriers where needed. By the time they finally returned to the farmhouse, dusk was falling and the rain had at last begun to subside. Sarah met them at the door with towels and hot drinks. Everyone all right? She asked, helping Blake remove his sodden raincoat. Cold, wet and tired, Oliver replied, but we saved what matters. Equipment sheds dry, livestock secure, and the drainage systems are functioning again. Couldn't have done it without our city boy, Morgan added unexpectedly, nodding toward Blake. Turns out he can handle a crisis better than any of us expected. Startled by the compliment from his most consistent critic, Blake felt a surprising warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the hot tea Sarah had pressed into his hands. "I just did what needed doing," he said quietly. "And that," Oliver replied with a knowing smile, "is the first lesson of farm life." Later that night, as Blake sank into bed, exhausted beyond measure but with a strange sense of satisfaction, he realized something had fundamentally changed within him. For the first time since arriving, he hadn't spent the day counting hours until he could leave. Instead, he had been fully present, engaged in work that mattered, contributing to something larger than himself. It was a small shift, perhaps, a hairline crack in the wall of resistance he'd built, but as sleep claimed him, Blake knew that whatever happened tomorrow or in the weeks to come, something had been set in motion that couldn't easily be reversed. The farm was changing him, just as his father had intended. The morning after the flood brought clear skies and the promise of warmer weather. Blake rose before his alarm, something that would have been unthinkable just 2 weeks ago. His muscles ached from yesterday's efforts, but it was a different kind of pain than he'd experienced during his first days on the farm, less like punishment and more like evidence of accomplishment. At breakfast, the conversation centered around assessing damage and prioritizing repairs. Blake found himself not just listening, but contributing. The drainage ditch by the east field was completely clogged with debris, he said, as he reached for another piece of Sarah's homemade bread. If we had some kind of barrier upstream, it might catch larger items before they reach the narrow section. Oliver and Morgan exchanged surprised glances. "That's actually a good idea," Morgan admitted. "A debris trap could save us hours of emergency clearing during storms. We could use some of that fencing material left over from the North Pasture project," Zoe suggested, giving Blake an appraising look. "It wouldn't take long to build." "I could help," Blake offered, surprising himself almost as much as everyone else at the table. "If someone shows me what to do." That afternoon, Blake found himself working alongside Zoe, constructing a simple but effective debris trap at a strategic point in the creek. The work was still physically demanding, but he approached it differently now, with purpose rather than resentment, curiosity rather than resignation. "So what made you study agricultural science?" he asked Zoe, as they secured metal fencing to wooden posts. "You could have gone into any field." "I love this land," she answered simply. "Always have. But I also saw how hard my parents worked, just to keep the farm afloat. I wanted to find better ways to do things, more sustainable, more efficient." She hammered a post with focused precision. "The farm's been in my mom's family for 5 generations. I plan to make sure it survives for at least 5 more. Her certainty about her path struck Blake forcefully. He'd never felt that kind of clarity about anything in his life. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "Know what?" "That this was what you wanted, that it was worth the work." Zoe paused, considering him with new interest. "I didn't always know. There were times I thought about leaving, especially during college when I saw how much easier some paths seemed." She gestured toward the fields stretching around them. "But this place is part of me, and protecting something that matters has its own rewards that money can't buy." Blake nodded slowly, understanding in a way he couldn't have just 2 weeks ago. As they returned to their work, something settled inside him. Not quite purpose yet, but perhaps the beginnings of it. As Blake's 3rd week at Silver Lake Farm approached its midpoint, the changes in him were becoming impossible to ignore. His body had transformed, lean muscle replacing the soft definition of his expensive Seattle gym membership. His hands, once manicured and smooth, now bore calluses he wore with unexpected pride. Most significant was the shift in his demeanor, the perpetual defensiveness giving way to genuine engagement, the sarcastic comments increasingly replaced by thoughtful questions. Each morning he rose without complaint, often before his alarm. Each day, he tackled his assignments with growing competence, occasionally suggesting improvements that surprised Oliver and Morgan with their practicality. Each evening, he participated in family dinner conversations that ranged from farm operations to global agricultural policies, finding himself genuinely interested in topics he would have dismissed as boring just weeks ago. It was during one such dinner that his new reality faced its first serious challenge. "Blake," Sarah said, passing him the mashed potatoes, "there's a message for you. Your father called the landline while you were out in the fields." Blake looked up, surprised. Elliot had called a few times since his departure, but their conversations had been brief and somewhat stilted, both men unsure how to navigate their changing relationship. "He said to tell you that Ryan Sheffield is having some kind of emergency celebration in Seattle this weekend," Sarah continued. "Apparently, he's just closed a major funding round for his startup and is flying friends in from around the country. Your father thought you might want to call him back about it." The name hit Blake like a physical force. Ryan Sheffield, his oldest friend and partner in countless escapades across Seattle's elite social scene. Ryan's parties were legendary, exclusive gatherings of the tech world's brightest young stars and the celebrities who orbited them. "I see," Blake said carefully, aware of the sudden attention from everyone at the table. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that your friend specifically asked for you to be there," Sarah replied. "He said you could use our phone to call him back after dinner." Dinner continued, but Blake's mind was suddenly 1,000 miles away, back in the glittering world he'd temporarily left behind. He could picture the scene perfectly. Ryan's penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, famous DJs, champagne flowing freely, connections being made that could launch or sink careers in the tech industry. 3 weeks ago, nothing could have kept him from such an event. Now, he felt torn in a way that surprised him. After dinner, Blake stood on the porch, the farm's ancient cordless phone in his hand, his father's number already dialed. "Blake," Elliot answered on the second ring. "Sarah gave you my message?" "She did," Blake confirmed, watching the sunset paint the distant fields in gold and amber. "About Ryan's party?" "I thought you should know," Elliot said carefully. "I know." "How close you two were," Blake corrected, surprising himself. "We haven't spoken much since I've been here." A brief silence. "The party's Saturday night. If you wanted to attend, we could arrange transportation. You've been working hard these past weeks. Perhaps a short break would be good." The offer hung in the air, not just a chance to attend a party, but a test of the changes taking place within him. The old Blake would have jumped at the escape opportunity, would have been already mentally packing his designer clothes and planning his triumphant return to social media with tales of his rural exile. But standing there on the farmhouse porch, with the sounds of Oliver and Morgan discussing the next day's work drifting through the screen door, the smell of Sarah's freshly baked apple pie cooling on the windowsill, and the memory of that morning's triumph when he'd successfully delivered a calf without assistance, Blake realized something profound. "I think," he said slowly, "I'll pass. We're rotating the North pasture herd this weekend, and Zoe's demonstrating a new irrigation system she's developed. I'd hate to miss that." The silence that followed contained more understanding than any words could have conveyed. The morning of Blake's final week at Silver Lake Farm arrived with a spectacular sunrise that painted the sky in fiery orange and golden hues. He stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as the first light touched the distant mountains and gradually illuminated the fields and barns below. After nearly 4 weeks of farm life, his body had adjusted to the early schedule. Rising before dawn no longer felt like torture, but instead offered quiet moments like this to appreciate the land's raw beauty. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Sarah's voice came from behind as she joined Blake on the porch. "Never gets old, no matter how many times you watch it," he agreed, sipping his coffee. "In Seattle, I never watch the sunrise." too busy sleeping off. The previous night or rushing to some appointment I'd inevitably skip, Sarah studied him with a knowing smile. You've changed since you arrived, you know, and I don't just mean the calluses on your hands. Blake glanced down at his palms, once manicured to perfection, now bearing the marks of honest labor. I've noticed, he said wryly. Oliver wants you to handle the Northfield irrigation system today, Sarah mentioned casually. Says you've got a good instinct for water distribution and pressure management. The simple statement of trust warmed Blake more than any designer purchase or VIP invitation ever had. I'd be happy to, he replied, surprised at how much he meant. After breakfast, Blake headed to the fields where Oliver was preparing equipment for the day. The morning routine had become second nature, checking irrigation systems, examining crops for signs of disease or pest damage, ensuring weather conditions were properly accounted for in the day's planning. Zoe's headed to town for supplies, Oliver informed him. Should be back by noon. You'll be on your own with the irrigation system. Think you can handle it? Absolutely, Blake nodded confidently. 4 weeks ago, the question would have seemed absurd. Now it felt like a natural progression of his growing competence. As he walked the North Fields later that morning, tablet in hand, to note soil moisture readings and calculate water needs, Blake reflected on how profoundly his perspective had shifted since arriving at the farm. Tasks that once seemed demeaning now gave him satisfaction. Physical exhaustion that had initially overwhelmed him now felt like an honest reward for meaningful work. Even the simplicity of farm meals, once a disappointment to his sophisticated palate, had become something he looked forward to, especially knowing many ingredients came directly from the land around him. He paused at the fence line, watching as a group of heifers grazed contentedly in the morning sunshine. Among them was Maple, the calf born during his second week, now steady on, her legs and growing rapidly. Blake felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward the animal, a connection to this place that transcended his temporary visit. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. Looking toward the main road, he spotted a familiar black SUV making its way up the gravel drive, a vehicle that looked startlingly out of place among the farm trucks and tractors. As it drew closer, Blake's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the Harrington Technologies logo on the driver's door. His father had arrived a week early. Abandoning his tablet on a fence post, Blake jogged across the field toward the farmhouse, unsure whether he felt excitement or apprehension at this unexpected development. By the time he reached the yard, Elliot Harrington was stepping out of the SUV, looking oddly incongruous in his tailored suit against the backdrop of the rustic. "Farm buildings? Dad?" Blake called, slowing to a walk as he approached. Elliot turned, his eyes widening slightly as he took in his son's appearance. Worn jeans, flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up, work boots, and hair tousled by the morning breeze. No designer. Labels, no carefully cultivated image, just Blake, unfiltered and authentic. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.